Dracula. Novel by Bram Stoker. Chapter 11: A Race Against Time. Jonathan almost lost his mind when he heard the news about Mina. He hit his head with his hands and cried wildly, like a madman.
Dracula! It's Dracula demon, and it's all because of me.
But Mina and Van Helsing calmed him, and soon he was able to talk about his visit to London. He said,
I know where the other boxes are. I paid Smollett and Snelling, and I have the address.
Van Helsing said,
Then we must go there quickly. But first we must find a way to guard Mina.
Mina said,
I'm coming with you. You'll see, I won't be afraid.
At the London address, the 5 men and Mina found all except one of Dracula's boxes. They destroyed them, but they did not find the Count. That night they guarded Mina carefully. In the morning Dr. Seward asked her how she felt. She said, a little tired. I was dreaming so much. In my dreams I was always on a boat, and I could hear water. Dr. Seward turned to the professor.
Perhaps she can read Dracula's mind while she's asleep.
Van Helsing agreed.
Perhaps. If she can, Dracula is leaving the country by sea inside his last box. He is going home. But which ship is the box on?
Mina asked.
Why do we want to know? He's leaving the country. Isn't that enough? Van Helsing took her hands.
Madam Mina, that was true a week ago. Before you drank the vampire's blood. But now we have to save your soul. We must destroy him.
They discovered that one ship, the Tsarina Catherine, sailed that morning from London for the Black Sea. The ship's office said that, at the last minute, a man put a box on the ship. He paid a lot of money. The 5 men and Mina immediately caught a train to Paris. From there they took a fast train to Varna and waited for the Tsarina Catherine. They waited for almost 2 weeks with no news of the ship. Every night Mina dreamed of a boat and the sound of water. Every day Van Helsing and Dr. Seward watched her for signs of change. They checked her teeth, her eyes, her skin. 2 weeks after they arrived in Varna, there was a thick sea mist. No one saw the Tsarina Catherine when it sailed past the port and up the river Danube to Galatz, 185 miles nearer Castle Dracula than Varna. Van Helsing said,
He knows that we are waiting for him. Madam Mina can read his mind, but we are forgetting. He can probably read her mind, too.
They caught a train to Galatz. There, they found a man who knew about the box. They had to make new plans. After a long discussion, everybody agreed that Dracula was probably going back to his castle by river. Van Helsing said,
I think that the best plan of action for us will be this. Arthur and Jonathan will take a boat and go after the vampire up the river. Jack and Quincy, I want you to follow the river on horseback. Mina and I will take the train to Veresti, and from there we will go towards the castle.
Before they went their different ways, Van Helsing spoke quietly to Seward.
Have you noticed, Jack? Madam Mina is changing. I can see the vampire coming into her face. Some of her teeth are sharper. At times her soft eyes become unusually hard. That is why I want her husband to go with Arthur. He must not see these changes in her. I will stay with Madam Mina. I know how to protect her. Now go. Every hour is very important. We cannot fail.
Jonathan and Arthur spent 2 days on the river. They sailed by day and by night, but they passed only a few boats, and these were too small for a large, heavy box. But on the 3rd day, they passed into the Bistritza. There they heard from some passing Slovaks that there was a big boat on the river in front of them. It was going unusually fast. Jonathan and Arthur were filled with hope. But the river became narrow and rocky, and bad luck hit them. They had an accident, and they had to stop and mend the boat. They lost many hours, and also the weather was getting worse. They were now only about 35 miles from Bistritz, so they decided to leave the boat at the next small town. They rode from there on horseback by small country roads towards their meeting place with Mina and the professor. The professor and Mina arrived at Veresti at midday on the last day of October. The professor found a carriage that could take them 62 miles. From Veresti through the mountains along the Bistritz road. He also bought food and warmer clothes.
Perhaps we will not see a town again for a week.
He explained. The roads were bad, but Van Helsing never got tired. He drove with only the shortest stops for sleep. Every time he reached a village, he changed horses. They reached the Bistritz road on the 2nd day. Mina slept, but she stopped dreaming of water. So Dracula was now traveling by land towards his castle. Then, as they climbed higher into the mountains, Mina seemed to take a greater interest in the road. 2 hours later, through the trees, they saw a dark shape in the clouds. High above them. It was the mountaintop home of the vampire, Castle Dracula. Van Helsing drove off the road and stopped under some trees. Snow was in the air, so he made a fire. While Mina sat quietly by the fire, Van Helsing drew a circle in the ground around her with a stick. He dropped small pieces of holy bread inside the circle. Then he waited outside the circle and watched Mina. He called,
Mina, come here.
Without answering, Mina got up. She began to walk towards him, but suddenly she stopped. She seemed unable to take another step. Van Helsing reached out his hand to her.
Come.
She shook her head and went down on her knees. He was right. She was already half vampire, and she could not leave the circle. But if she could not leave it, others could not go in. He thought,
I shall be safe inside the circle. And Mina will be safe too. I only hope that I shall be safe from Mina.
Darkness came. Sometimes the horses made frightened noises. Van Helsing went to them and calmed them. He was tired. But he was afraid to sleep while Mina was awake. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, the fire began to die down. They needed some wood before the snow got worse. Van Helsing stood up, but Mina stopped him.
Don't leave the circle now.
I am worried about you.
He replied. Mina gave a strange, deep laugh.
Don't worry about me. Nobody's safer from them than I am.
Van Helsing did not understand, but then the horses screamed again. He looked and saw, in the darkness, 3 women outside the circle. They were beautiful, and they moved in a slow, strange dance. He thought,
These are the women who drank Jonathan's blood.
They reached out their arms, calling for Mina. He could feel Mina's growing excitement. He was afraid that the circle was not strong enough to protect him. He picked up a piece of burning wood and threw it at the women. They screamed and disappeared. Silence returned. He felt more tired than ever. He wanted to sleep, but Mina was looking at him in a strange way. He was sure now. It was not safe to sleep in her company. She was now almost a vampire. Day came slowly. It stopped snowing, but the skies were still heavy and grey. Jonathan, Dr. Seward, Arthur, and Quincy rode as fast as they could. They were not far behind their enemy. On the mountain road above them, they saw a cart and a number of men on horseback. They rode without stopping all day, but the cart with Dracula in his box was moving too fast. It was a race against time. Suddenly they heard a gunshot. Jonathan pulled out his Indian knife. Quincy put his hand on his gun. They were filled with a nervous excitement. The end was near. The men were standing around the cart with knives in their hands. Van Helsing stood in the middle of the road in front of them, holding a gun. They seemed unsure of their next step. He was one and they were many. He had a gun, but they could all attack at the same time. Suddenly, 4 horsemen rode straight at them. Jonathan was riding the fastest. He waved his knife and screamed like a madman. The men were too surprised to act. Jonathan and Quincy jumped off their horses and ran to the cart. There was a short fight. Quincy flew to the ground, holding his side. Minutes later, most of the men were running away down the mountainside. It was almost dark. They had to reach Dracula before the light disappeared. While Arthur, Van Helsing, and Dr. Seward fought the last of Dracula's helpers, Jonathan jumped onto the cart. Quincy, in great pain, climbed up with him. The body inside was beginning to move. Dracula's eyes were opening. His mouth was forming an evil smile. They didn't have a sharp piece of wood, so Onathan pushed his knife down hard into Dracula's neck. Quincy pushed a knife straight into Dracula's heart. Dracula opened his mouth and produced a long, terrible scream. Again and again the men cut into his neck and heart with their knives until Dracula's head came away from his body. For a second Dracula's face continued to scream, then suddenly there was silence. They watched, unable to look away. A quiet look of restful sleep came over the vampire's face, and his body disappeared. Seconds later, they were looking into an empty box. Mina saw that Quincy was hurt. She ran out of the holy circle towards him. He was lying on his back, and blood from the wound in his side was falling into the snow. As Jonathan held Quincy's head, Mina took his hand and said,
"We've won, Doc, we've beaten him."
Quincy took a deep breath and looked up at Mina.
I'm glad I could help,
he said. Then, with a smile, the American adventurer closed his eyes and died. Mina stood up slowly. She was very sad at the death of a brave, dear friend. Jonathan took her in his arms and kissed her. Arthur sat by Quincy's body, with a lost look in his eyes. Van Helsing looked at Seward.
Have you noticed it too?
He said. Seward knew what the professor meant. Mina's face was different now. The long teeth, the unnatural color of her skin, the strange look in her eye, they were not there now. She was the real Mina again. Her soul was saved. subscribe and like and shares. See you in the next video.